Hello and welcome to another episode of CollectaThought, the show where I collect my thoughts on video games, and today I bring you Fire Emblem Three Houses, a game I really didn't expect to be playing at all, mostly because I'm not that huge into turn-based strategy RPGs, or just strategy RPGs. Do you need to say it's turn-based? Regardless, this has never been particularly my cup of tea. I'm just not very good at these games in general, and that's probably why I don't enjoy them as much. But this being such a highly praised Switch game, and also a game in a series I don't have a whole lot of experience with, and people saying it's kind of a good entry point, I thought it would be a good idea to have a go at it. And it's been over 2 years since the game came out, so I doubt anyone is dying for this review or anyone is gonna be particularly mad, hopefully, when, I give it a really good score, but I complain about things that aren't really bad things about the game. Regardless, let's start with the setting of this game, the story as well. And Fire Emblem is a medieval fantasy type of game where, you have the medieval things like knights in armor and kings and wars between kingdoms and castles and all that stuff, and then the fantasy side with the magic and dragons, which end up make this game feeling oddly like Harry Potter. I know I'm not the first one to make this comment for sure, but the fact this game takes place for the most part in a giant monastery. Then of course the houses, they're not houses here, obviously they're guilds, but they even share very similar colors, which in this case I personally went with the golden deers for no reason besides the reason of having the most waifus. Regardless though, the story of the game, without spoiling, revolves around our main character not really knowing his origins and then coming to this monastery and picking a team, so to say. And then the story kind of branches out from there in various ways, dealing with wars between different groups of this world and maybe even other guilds. No spoilers here, but it is a very standard kind of fantasy plot. It has some nice twists, but I'll be honest, this has never been particularly my genre or the genre that I find the most exciting. I think here where Fire Emblem does stand out is more in its characters and how it deals with them. Every character feels very fleshed out, and in that way it makes you a lot more invested in the story, more than I think I would be otherwise. Adding to this is also the idea that you can raise your relationship with each character by spending more time with them in various different ways, kinda like a Persona game for example, but here focusing a lot more on a mechanical side of it, as a lot of these character moments also provide you with rewards that may be stat-wise or item-wise. And don't get me wrong, bringing back that Persona comparison, in that game you also raise the relationship with characters for gameplay reasons, but I do feel like here it is a lot more focused on that rather than simply getting to know your characters. I say that because as I was playing this game, I found myself a lot of the times deepening relationships with certain characters because I felt like it would give me an edge in battle rather than doing it because I particularly liked their character. Also, unlike Persona as well, there is a much more limited management here, and by that I mean I don't think it's possible to max out everyone in this game in terms of relationship. I think you are just meant to pick a few or whoever you can to try and make your team as strong as possible. Especially since if you play at harder difficulties where losing a character means losing it for the rest of the game. I will say right now that I most definitely did not play that. I played on almost easy basically because I did not want to put myself in a position where I could not progress the game further and I would have wasted 20-30 hours of gameplay. So that was my choice. If you want to, the option is there to play on higher difficulties and difficulties that make your decisions matter a lot more, but personally I'm not huge into that, so that's not my experience here. Regardless, I do think this big focus on the core loop of the gameplay, even with the relationship with the characters, is what ends up making me not like this game as much as a Persona, for example, which I keep bringing up because it's the only game I can think at the moment that has a very similar setup in terms of relationships and gameplay. And the reason for that is because I found myself actually enjoying some of the meaninglessness of it all, which sounds very weird to say, but what I mean by that is I enjoy simply learning about these characters and getting to know them better, and I don't particularly need a incentive beyond that, or feeling like the incentive beyond that is the actual incentive and the character development is more of an extra. But I also have to give this game credit where it's due, and the core gameplay of the game is very tight, as in between main story missions you are given a certain amount of time to manage, where you can either go on missions or train at the monastery. Training at the monastery involves quite a lot of things you can do, raising certain character stats, raising your own stats, doing certain side missions, and collecting certain items or buying certain items. That being said, the game also just has a lot of ease of use options, allowing you to buy things and accessing things like the blacksmith or the item shop purely through the menus without having to go into the monastery and maybe waste a day. That's good, because sometimes, I want to go into a mission and I want to buy some new equipment, or I want to fix some equipment, and I don't want to have to waste a day going into the monastery. Also, I said improving the stats of your characters at the monastery, but that's not quite right. They mostly level up their stats by battle, so mostly through the optional missions you can do, where you actually do the gameplay of the game, the turn-based strategy bit, or even simply through the main quest. The stats that you can improve in the monastery are more in the terms of their proficiencies with certain weapons, and also their mood, which is a stat in itself, sort of. Basically, their mood changes between being, of course, unhappy and happy, and the happier they are, the better they will do during classes, and also maybe during combat. I'm not quite sure, honestly. At least I couldn't tell the difference. But more importantly is during classes. When a character has a better mood, they learn better, which raises their proficiency with whatever weapon or style they're trying to train with, which is important because this is also what allows you to get higher and better classes, or specific classes in general. By classes I mean, the knights, the archer, and the mages, things like that, where each class has a determined level of proficiency with specific weapons or styles that they need for the character to be able to learn them. And the higher the proficiency is on those required stats, the higher the chances are that they will learn it on their first try, as learning these classes is a bit of a chance, but you can also easily get it to 100% chance if you train their specific stats. So obviously then it becomes a big managing time game of when you should go on missions and leveling up your base stats for your characters and the characters that are gonna be on those missions, and when to stay home and level up their proficiencies and maybe get them to newer classes. You can also just change class or teach new classes within the menus, which again, another ease of use thing that's very helpful. And honestly, I don't have that much else to say about the gameplay. It's very tight, it's very good. If you like turn-based strategy, I think you'll like this. Either being JRPG or not, I think most people who like this genre will quite like it. But for those like me who were more interested in the story and the characters, I do think this game still does quite well. But I do think you have to understand that the main focus of them will be the gameplay, regardless of how well developed they are, and it can end up feeling like that's what they are, They have these moments between each other and between you and them, which lets you learn more about them, but in the back of your head you're still like, yeah, this was just a stat raise. Which, maybe it's more of a me problem than a game problem, and I totally understand that. It's not so much a critique as more something that I felt while playing the game. Another way that I've kind of found myself rationalizing this, though, it's also through the main story not being particularly my cup of tea or not me enjoying it that much. As I do feel like the characters in this game often just kind of refer to the main story even when it doesn't particularly have anything to do with it per se. A funny example of this was a character that asked that they wanted to find someone to get married, and one of the choices for this was, don't worry, you'll get time for that after the war, which I think really shows the focus here. That's fine, like I said, that's completely fine, but not really my cup of tea. And unfortunately, the whole game is not really my cup of tea, except for the parts where you're just kind of hanging out with these characters, and to be fair, that is quite a lot of it. But when they, again, refer to the war every 2 minutes, I think it does take away from it. Now, speaking more of technical terms, because honestly I feel like I've just been babbling about things that I don't really like about this game, but are not really bad. Graphics of this game look, really good. I'm not gonna take away from it. I do think that the color palette can feel a bit muted at times, especially when compared to the color of the guilds of this game, which are very colorful. You know, yellow, red, and blue are fairly prominent colors, but most of this game looks kind of like, you know, drab medieval times, which I think does take away from it quite a bit. But if that's the aesthetic of Fire Emblem, then fine, I guess. From a technical level, it does look really good for the Switch, but it also comes with a drawback that, much like Breath of the Wild, another game that looks really great on the Switch, it also drains battery very quickly, which was my experience here. 2, maybe 3 hours if you lower the brightness. Mind you, I do have a pretty old Switch at this point, but still it's a very battery draining game. You can tell the Switch is struggling, not because of the frame rate, which I actually found that it was quite smooth. At least I didn't notice anything really kind of dipping. What you do notice sometimes is the Switch kind of stopping to think, happening during, you know, autoplay turns or during enemy turns, where it just kind of stops to think for a bit. I'm not sure what kind of, you know, processing it's doing at that moment, but this definitely seems to be a Switch issue, as I also noticed this with the AI in other games, like for example the Yu-Gi-Oh games on the Switch. Regardless, it looks great, and soundtrack wise it also sounds great. It's very memorable, but what I will say about it is it feels really fast. It's always like, I don't know enough about music to really convey this, but it feels like fast tempoed. There's a very high BPM for a game that, you know, takes place in what is supposed to be medieval time, which I think is kind of a, you know, coming more from the side of this being also a sort of anime-esque game, but who knows. It sounds good either way, because, you know, even if it is that more anime side, it still is a very anime game and it does fit the nature of it, but just something I thought I should mention. And now to finish this off, honestly I didn't speak too much about this game, I didn't go too in-depth, and because I feel like many people have already done that in better ways, I kinda just really wanted to express that feeling that this game does everything right and somehow it just doesn't click with me. And I think that's okay, and I think that might be the experience of other people as well, so I do think that people should try this game because it is legitimately incredible in a lot of ways. But also be aware that maybe it's not for you, and you shouldn't feel bad if it's not for you. I mean, even though I didn't love a lot of the features of it, I still very much finished the game with no problem at all. To be fair, I also played another game. I played Pokemon in the middle of this because Pokemon came out while I was playing this, and that became my focus for a while. But regardless, it was still a good time and I quite enjoyed it. And for that, I am giving Fire Emblem 3 Houses an 8 out of 10. It should be a 9, let's be honest, but you know, this is my opinion, my personal opinion, and it's based on my personal experience. Because if it wasn't, what would be the point of this channel? Regardless, recommendations wise, sure, play it. It's been 2 years, I'm sure you can find it for a better price than, you know, full price, hopefully. If not, honestly, this game still deserves full price. It is a very content-rich game, but, you know, it's hard to recommend that for a 2-year-old game. Regardless, though, I hope that you enjoyed watching, and if so, please consider subscribing, liking, commenting. Nowadays, you can also dislike, because it doesn't mean anything. And regardless of that, Leone is Chie. You cannot change my mind. Goodbye.